Welcome, greetings all, Dr. Gentleman here, and today I'm excited because I'm off to see a Japanese orchestra called JAGMO perform the outstanding soundtracks from Undertale and Deltarune. I donned this hoodie to mark the day. It was a gift from a friend and it has this fan art on the front. Wait a second though, since I'm pretty sure this was fan art that was just plucked from the internet, I should totally credit the artist. Hold on. Okay, it was quite hard to find since this image has been re-uploaded a billion times without credit, but I believe this was drawn by Miupachi on Tumblr, so I'll link their page in the description, and please do correct me if I'm wrong. Anyway, I'm going to head to the concert now, but I'll be back later on, and then I want to talk about just what makes Undertale, for me and for many others, one of the best video games of all time, and a masterpiece in precisely matching the story to the medium. I'll try to avoid any major spoilers, but please be warned before watching this video that Undertale is a game truly best enjoyed spoiler-free on a first playthrough. And with that noted, let's go. The concert was a superb experience, even though with this virus going around, the audience mostly looked like a hospital ward. We were lucky it wasn't cancelled altogether, if anything. It wasn't exactly a picturesque venue, so all I filmed were these shots of the auditorium in the dark, but basically it looked like this. Toby Fox's simple, memorable soundtracks made for a great performance, and there was a very impactful final movement based on the genocide route. I loved seeing a full orchestra perform Bone Trussell and Field of Hopes and Dreams, and of course, Bird That Carries You Over a Disproportionately Small Gap. A piece of music that frankly deserves a bigger orchestra than the Ring Cycle. The musicians excelled at jazzier tracks like Ghost Fight, Napsterblook's theme, and I loved the frantic pace of The World Revolving. Somewhat to my surprise, the heaviest emotional hit for me was Battle Against a True Hero. Undyne isn't my favourite character, but that music really got me. The only track that didn't really work arranged for orchestra was Your Best Nightmare, and I was really hoping to hear Save the World, but they didn't include music from the True Pacifist route. As with most of these video game and movie soundtrack concerts, and I've been to a few now, it was the percussion that really shone here. So much of the Undertale soundtrack sounds beautiful on vibraphone, marimba, or even tubular bells. This was absolutely one of my top 10 musical experiences, and I've had a whole lot of good ones in my time. So while my dial may not quite turn up to the levels of those people you see in reaction compilations of Sans and Smash and the rest of it, nonetheless, buoyed up by this enthusiasm, let's talk about Undertale. About what makes this game the first one I want to include in my series on pop culture masterworks. And why yes, I did work extremely hard on those effects. Undertale was essentially a perfect storm of things coming together at just the right moment so that something intended for a relatively small niche audience became a huge hit that resonated on a mainstream level. Kind of like Nevermind by Nirvana, which the band expected to make a small splash on the punk scene. Toby Fox drew on his love for the Mother games, an aesthetic influence from other indie games like Cave Story with a dash of bullet hell, unashamedly embraced anime cliches and brought not only a portion of the audience but also some of the net culture humour from Homestuck, which he had provided some music for. These elements mixed in just the right way to create a small and charming game that hooks you at the start with sweetness and humour, keeps you engaged with simple but effective world building, and then embeds itself permanently in the deepest parts of your heart, with its tragic backstory, surprise twists, and through its method of convincing the player, these characters mean more than any others in video games you have played before. Honestly, I didn't fall fully in love with Undertale on my first playthrough, though certainly I enjoyed it, and I know plenty of people did fall in love. But for me, it wasn't until the true pacifist ending that I really grew to love the characters and understand the world they were a part of on a deeper level. I guess that's why it's these characters on my hoodie that give me the deepest emotional response. One you're led to believe is a villain but is actually mostly a victim of tragic circumstances, and the other who seems sweet and innocent but is in fact the most contemptible character in the whole scenario, by far. Unless you have some wild Gaster headcanon anyway. There's so often that awkward moment when you talk to someone about Undertale and they say something like, "I hate that stupid flower so much," and you have to pause and work out how much it's worth risking spoiling plot elements if they haven't yet found out everything about the underlying story, whether through playing the game or, watching loud Swedes and Irishmen doing so here on YouTube. And I do keep mentioning the story because for me, more than the graphics, the wonderful music, the quirky game mechanics, or the memorable, often outlandish character designs, it's the writing that makes Undertale what it is. And since this is primarily a literature channel and my background and qualifications all revolve around English and storytelling, I'd like to explore just why that is. Occasionally you see people talk about adaptations of Undertale. When's the movie, the TV show, the comic coming out? Why doesn't Toby Fox write a novel of his Undertale story? It would make so much money. But the fact is, it probably wouldn't work in any other form. Undertale most definitely would not make a good novel without being changed so much from its source that it ceases to be Undertale. A skeleton speaking in a specific font, going in capital letters, is something that works in a goofy game but would look really dumb in a book. Even a goofy book, it would be a step too far even in a Terry Pratchett novel. Also, hiding that the name you choose at the start isn't meant for what you think it is would be a lot harder in narration, and it would be so much more obvious that everyone is saying human instead of a name. So much of the story here revolves around the nature of playing a game itself, and the choices you make affecting what you're told on your journey. And that's a realm where video games are able to convey unique narratives. Now, this isn't to say a novel writer can't withhold information or mislead the reader. That's basically the whole point of mystery novels. Vladimir Nabokov loves unreliable narrators and does some extremely clever things in books like Pale Fire and Despair to make the reader think they're being told one story, only to have another revealed to them. But the way it's done here is very, very specific to games. Just like Pale Fire is very specific to poetry with footnotes, and that's why Undertale is so well written. It's written by a gamer for gamers, and puts the expectations a player has of engaging with this kind of content front and centre in order to subvert them. If you've never played a video game in your life, a lot might be lost on you here. You're not going to be very surprised that EXP doesn't mean what you thought it did, or have much appreciation for the weirdness of having a game preempt what you're going to do with your saves. Undertale is superbly written because it's a game about playing games, but that conceit is not a dumb, self-serving joke. It's played completely straight as part of the world building. The characters are simply in a world where game mechanics exist, and the ones who are aware of them believe in them wholeheartedly as part of their everyday existences. After players clash with Toriel and maybe get, well, let's say an outcome they aren't so happy with, the ones who quit and reload the game will be taunted by Flowey. He knows what you did. A number of your decisions will affect what happens in the game in ways you probably don't expect when you're used to a linear narrative where going back erases the consequences of your actions. And that's a story you can only tell through a video game. The actual narrative is not incredibly original, but then part of the point is that it has you in familiar territory that can then be twisted about and reshaped like noodles being made from scratch. A small, gender-ambiguous child falls into a hole at the top of a mountain and ends up in a world populated by monsters, trapped down there long ago after a war with humans. The child's soul is coveted by the Monster King, who just needs one more to break down the barrier that keeps his subjects from going into the human realm. Some monsters are deceitful, others seem protective, but most generally want to capture the human for the king, if not always very competently. The king, though, is in no hurry to hunt down this final human soul. Only one soul is needed to pass through the barrier, so if he really wanted to gather the other 6 he'd need to break it down altogether, well, potentially he'd have other ways to do so. Little by little, the player uncovers a backstory of another very similar human child who lived with the royal family, becoming close to their son. The child's death and the consequences of a monster trying to return a human body to the other side of the barrier are what set the real underlying story into motion, long before our frisky player character's adventure begins. I think I was most impressed that this hidden story is all there, packed away in this game that honestly could have remained very obscure with only very slightly different circumstances. Toby Fox's labour of love is very much apparent here, and it would have been quite easy for the game to just have a good route and an evil route, and not need any of this extra world building we uncover going for the true ending. Another reason the story so perfectly matches the medium is that, apart from gimmicky things like choose your own adventure novels, other media cannot so effectively present you with options to choose a pacifist, neutral, or genocide route. There's an incredibly dense amount of text in this game, from all the extra dialogue when pursuing this true ending, to phone call dialogue for each room that the average player will never see, but that's part of the labour of love, and gives me fond memories of the point-and-click adventures I grew up with, like Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle. Undertale also delights in making the player feel a certain way. You get a little preview of that when you're presented with a bowl of candy during Toriel's tutorial. A setup you might recognise from other games that makes it seem like you can take unlimited items. But take more than one and you start getting messages about how bad it makes you feel, which might make you curious to see what other message you might get, but then take too many and the bowl falls and you're just told how guilty you should feel. It's a really fun little moment and kind of emblematic of what is to come. Toriel is set up to make you do something you regret. Go back to redo it and then have Flowey point the finger at you, or the end of a leaf, I guess. Which is basically a clever guilt trip. Going for a genocide route will be remembered, and though it was a shock when I first saw Azrael say it to me right at the end of all possible actions in the game, I love how much weight is given to the words, "Don't you have anything better to do?" which various iterations of the same character will say to you when you look to do things in a very repetitive way, which is in itself an odd kind of reward for doing so. To me, it's fascinating how this extra layer of highlighting the player's volition changes how we feel about the characters. When a little pixelated sprite actually comes and asks you to rethink what you'll be making the characters go through if you reset the game after the true ending, or when you're reminded again and again that the moral choices you're making within the game matter long term within that world, it actually humanizes the characters much more. The non-human characters, I do get the irony. Undertale is definitely not the first time the player's volition and decision making becomes a major plot point in a video game. If anything, it was a bit of a 2010s fashion. It was done first, to my knowledge at least, and quite brilliantly in BioShock. Though I guess indirectly that piece of writing grew out of mechanics in games like Fable, where your choices have long-term consequences. Then it was the most memorable part of Spec Ops: The Line, even if I really hated how they implemented the idea there, making the only good choice to be just stop playing mid-campaign. But in Undertale, the game seeks to foreground the decision-making of a player as an element some characters within the world are aware of. That does so much to give the player the illusion of these characters existing in a more real way than conventional characters do, which is just so remarkable to me as a storyteller. Being completely honest, even as a big fan, without this plot element, I don't think the characters would be as beloved as they are. They're all broad stereotypes, largely derived from anime and cartoons. Toriel is a classic matronly figure, Alphys is a somewhat annoying, stuttering otaku, Sans is the laid-back joker who can get very, very serious when he needs to, Papyrus is a bumbling, self-aggrandizing buffoon, and Undyne is a musclehead with a soft side. They're pretty broad, well-established character types. Toby Fox is absolutely cognizant of anime character tropes and makes no apology for it, not only having a tsundere plane, but throwing that otaku culture loanword in for a description of a cactus as well. This isn't at all to say that these characters are badly written. I adore them all. Well, maybe Alphys a bit less than the others. Sorry, Alphys. But I genuinely think they are beloved by players much more than other very similar characters in other games and media because of this conceit that their existence goes beyond most on the page or screen. We don't care about how many times Mario falls into a hole or Sonic drowns, but there's a visceral reaction to knowing you're choosing to slaughter the cast of this game, such that many players refuse to ever do a genocide run. Sure, that comparison isn't wholly fair because deaths in plot-based video games obviously have a much more profound effect when there are ramifications within the narrative, but what Undertale offers is a subtly fresh, different feeling about character deaths because of this conceit that your choices matter on a deeper level than just a pixelated sword slashing at a pixelated RPG blob. Ultimately, what made me love Undertale was not purely the setup, genius though I think it is. It's how well this idea harmonizes with a world that already carefully balances humor and sincere, heartfelt storytelling. Which is also why I didn't truly fall in love with the game until I came to the true ending and realized how heartfelt and sincere it was. Which is largely thanks to one fluffy goat boy of hyperdeath, who doesn't get to have the same happy ending as the rest. The humour definitely worked for me as well, and while not everyone feels the same, I know, Papyrus's antics and the layers upon layers of ridiculous entertainment delivered by Metatron are exactly my kind of humour. And I'm sure I'm sometimes walking down the road and will remember, oh yes, and look like a crazy person grinning to myself. The ways to win battles not only made me nostalgic for Earthbound, but are often laugh out loud funny, and using cute silly dogs to get everyone in a good mood or provide some laughs is also pretty smooth. Smooth move, Mr. Fox. Balancing these genuinely funny moments with the chilling reality of the true lab, or listening to what Azrael has to tell you once he's, calmed down a bit, that's what elevated this game to being one of the best of all time for me. I'm not sure if we'll get another Undertale. As I said at the start, it was a bit of a perfect storm. I loved the Deltarune demo, but it certainly feels more like, if it's ever completed, it will be a companion piece rather than an equal. And such was Undertale's impact that, unfortunately, anything even remotely similar to it will have to be compared, probably negatively. Making another game that looks like this, or that offers the same kinds of choices, would be like writing a book about a boy wizard going to magic school and fighting a dark lord. There were loads of stories like that before, but do one now and you know it's going to be called derivative. But that leaves us with Undertale, and I for one am totally happy with that. It's a great achievement in storytelling, in my opinion, and that's after all what this channel is primarily about. It perfectly matched its storytelling to its medium, and took full advantage of the differences between how a narrative unfolds on a screen where a player is controlling a character, and a conventional narrative where the observer is passive. Even more so than wonderful conventional stories like The Last of Us that show just how moving and cinematic games can be, Undertale represents a pushing of storytelling boundaries and a superlative intertwining of story and medium, which is why I can unambiguously state that Undertale is a masterwork of pop culture. I'll leave it at that. Please do all the usual YouTube stuff. I've been posting very sporadically on this channel and engagement has pretty much nosedived, so it would be appreciated. But with that said, thank you for coming, and I will see you again next time.